Good evening all. I'm going to do the first part of this video on a single camera while I continue charging up my iPhone. So what we've got here is Danny's H.E.R signature Strat, and it's in a groovy metallic silver with a brushed aluminium scratch plate. We've got noiseless Fender pickups, classic noiseless pickups, standard Fender Strat controls. Yet again, the completely infuriating body adjusted tremolo, which is, as anyone who's had to ever adjust one of those knows, it's a complete silly thing. I mean, you might want to carry on bringing sort of traditional aspects of the Strat or historic aspects of the Strat into your kind of modern signature redesign or whatever, but to do it with a heel adjuster like that is just completely barmy, because it means somebody who wants to, or you, the owner, who wants to set your or adjust your relief curvature in your neck, you have to take the neck off and guess at the amount of adjustment you need, put the neck back on, tighten the strings, tune them up to tension, and then try it again if it isn't enough, and so on and so forth. So it is a real, I think it's a blasted stupid thing. But anyway, so what we have is a made in Mexico signature series and classic split post tuners, which Danny wants replacing. We've got some chrome open gear hip shots to go in there, which means we're going to need to remount the holes to 10 from 8. Skunk stripe in the back. We've got some chunky shallow locking type things. I don't know if they're shallow, but they're locking strap buttons. Aluminium plate on the back, and we have the H.E.R neck plate, as you saw there. We've got a standard classic bridge, which when I got the guitar was tilted up and it become completely unplayable. So the aim of this setup is going to get that back to normal, obviously do any fret leveling, and to make this as low and light as possible, because Danny's got carpal tunnel syndrome in her hands, and she was heartbroken not to be able to play this. She bought this, played it, I don't know, for a short time, a week or two, realized she had this carpal tunnel thing in her hands and hasn't played it since, and that's pretty depressing because it's a gorgeous guitar and she wants to play it. So my aim here is to put it back into a condition that it's obviously playable, but also to set it up as lightly as possible. With that aim in mind, we're going to take the unusual step of going to 8s on this guitar. When Danny came around to my place, because she's local to me, she came around to my place and tried a couple of guitars with 8s on, and she felt that might be a good start point. Of course, you can always go to 9s. These are currently 10s. One of them was broken, so I've put a spare one on for the time being, so I can use this as the sacrificial strings. Now, I've had a lot of Fenders through recently where they're quite rightly been open for an awful lot of criticism. You know, £1,000 premium Fender guitars, Strats, most of them, and they've all come with various, not just Strats, Meteoras and a couple of Tellys as well, but loads of premium Fenders, and they've come through with all manner of small details that just shouldn't be the case. And that's before even looking at the general unlevelness of the frets, which of course you'll find on a £1.5 Stratocaster as easily as you'll find it on a £1.5 American Gibson. But beyond that, which is kind of what I expect to do for any and every guitar regardless of price point, beyond that there are also some really terrible things like the fret treatment and the finish that on some of these guitars comes up and over the frets and so on and so forth. Now, looking at this one, this is a slightly different beast in that, well, actually it does have some of these unacceptable flaws, and they may seem really small to begin with, but and I don't know whether every single one of them was factory based. For example, when we look at the nut up close, it's this Corian bone, artificial bone, I think. But anyway, there's bits chipped off it. I don't know if you can see it, but at either end, I don't know where it's gone now. There's a bit chipped off the end here, and then there's a bit chipped off there. That could have been done in use, so let's not beef too much. There is also a funny little blemish underneath the finish, which lives, sorry about this, right there. That's actually in the paint layer, so it's below the clear cut. Clear cut? What's a clear cut? Oh, anyway, below the clear layer. So you can't really do anything with it, but it's just a factory defect that's been sprayed over. Just a tiny little thing, so okay, nothing show-stopping. But there is one thing on this guitar which is quite astonishing actually, and it's, I don't know if you can see it, if I can get you in focus, it's this. Okay, so what we've got here is a repair. Now this is something that a shop has done afterwards for Danny. And what happened apparently on this is that when she first got the guitar, after kind of handling it a couple of times, putting it in and out of the bag, a void opened up in this, sorry, I'm trying to get you a view, you can see some, see that, look, there's another kind of, see that strange reflection going on there? So I'm trying to find it. That sort of, look, see that little line there that's showing up as a reflection? There's a sort of, there's a defect there. But it's mainly this one here. This, if you imagine a slot you could push a 10p coin into, or a quarter or something, that's what opened up. And of course the finish fell out and there was a hole. Apparently I don't know whether it was the vendor or the manufacturer, claimed that it might have been caused by the strap or something rubbing in the case, or the zip of the case or something rubbing against it, which is absolute nonsense. You don't create a great big hollow void. And you see they filled it, or somebody has done a pretty good job in filling it, and then they've painted it with a matching Fender paint by the looks of it. But it's giving away again. Can you see this? It's going to fall apart, judging by these little cracks. So that is a void in the timber, in my opinion, in the original timber of the guitar. And of course you're looking at it the whole time because it's pointing down at you. And the only real way you're going to get around that, well, first of all, if you've finished or filled the void properly, or thoroughly, I don't know, but you'd actually have to, I can feel it, I mean that's not so great, but you'd probably need to refinish the guitar. And I think that the manufacturer should have paid for that to be done. Anyway, that's another matter. I know Danny's kind of accepted that's how it was. I think this has been sitting around for a couple of years now, waiting for her to get it sorted and get back to it. So let's leave it as it is, write it off as you know, battle scars. But so the plan for this guitar is going to be, we can sort of get going on a couple of preliminary things while I'm here. Just got the camera down here. What I will do is after I've done this, I'm going to take a little break where I charge up my battery a bit more before I get sort of stuck in. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just take off the plates, and I'm going to just put this face down for a minute, take off the plates with a view to starting my whole setup process by neutralizing, if you like, the tremolo. So I'm not sure whether this tremolo came originally to Danny in a floating form or whether it was down only, but I think, you know, she's not, like many people, she's not fully up to speed on the options for a tremolo and also what happens or how it balances. So it's very easy for somebody who's not experienced as a setter-upper for a tremolo to go wrong pretty quickly, because if you start, for example, over tightening the strings or the springs, you can very easily end up in a sort of tug of love between the springs and the strings, and without knowing it, you've got either the tremolo, the strings way over tightened and the tremolo's kicked up at the back, or you haven't got enough and the springs are loose or whatever. You know, it's not an easy thing to do, and I'm going to talk about this kind of talking directly to Danny as much as anything. So what you have here is what they call this the Tremolo claw, and this device, its job is to hold these springs here as they stick into the block. So that whole arrangement there holds the claw, or holds the bridge in place, or puts tension on the bridge, I should say, and it's variable tension. So at this end of things, you can change the tension by adding tremolo springs here if you want to, or my experience is that a Fender is perfectly good with 3, or you can change the tension of the springs on this block, the amount of pull, by winding in this claw, winding in those screws so the claw goes further back this way. Now if we just, oh, I've got a bad wrist today. If we just look over this side here, you can see that at the moment in the battle of tensions, the springs are not strong enough to counter the strings. But I have a feeling there might be another thing. Is it? No, actually that's not bad. Yeah, it's just simple at the moment. The strings are overwhelming the springs. So to get rid of this this kick up at the back, which we don't want to start with, we're going to turn it over again, and we're going to first of all screw in the claw screws a little bit more. Now these are ridiculously stupid to get access to. Actually, funny enough, Fender, for once, they've put them wide enough to just about sit between the claws. Can you see that? Normally, that isn't the case. Normally, the designers tend to put them straight over the top of the claws, so you end up, pushing. You end up being your screwdrivers at an angle. And one of the quickest, fastest things to happen on these is they get mashed up because your screwdriver, this one's not quite on target, but it's better than I've seen many before. So yeah, your screws often get mangled because of the misplacement of these screws. Anyway, so now I've gone in about 5-6 mils, and we look on the back now, and this is now very near to being correctly placed. But I have a feeling that something else is going on here, which I'm just going to make a small adjustment to. I feel like these screws may be a tiny bit too tight. Now we'll come on to that in a minute. Maybe a little drawing would be handy. So I'm just going to back these off a tiny bit counterclockwise, just so that I can be sure that they're not pulling the front of the block down any. Yeah, we don't want it pulling the front of the block down. So I'm going to come back to the rear, and I'm going to tighten up a bit more. Now this is, all I'm doing really, first of all, is making the guitar into a hard tail effectively. So I'm dialing in so much more power of the springs into the block so that it sits back down and is pretty much flat. That should be holding it dead flat, but I have a feeling these are still a fraction. Something's pulling the front of the tremolo down a little bit. I'm going to just exaggerate and back it off a tiny bit more. You can always tweak this afterwards. I'm going to just try and make sure that there's nothing holding the front of the block down, or the plate I should say. Let's have a look. I think that's probably, still, it looks like, is it this, the metal here is slightly, it might just be slightly bent or something. This plate, see, it appears to be sitting down flat on that side. It is flat on that side. Okay, that's fine by me. It is flat as it can be, and it's effectively hard-tailed. It's just interesting that this flange here, if you could call it that, is actually touching the surface, and it's resting on that. But this end here has about 1/3 of a millimeter still to go, which shows there's it's not perfectly even. But then it's wood, and and it's wood and lacquer, so it might not be perfectly even. Okay. So I think what I'm going to do for Danny's interest more than anything else, but let me just get a bit of space on the whiteboard. I'm just going to sort of think through and draw through as I go. I'm going to hang the guitar for a minute on the peg. I'm just going to think with you through the tremolo. So, guitar top, something like that, and then we've got a bridge here, sort of like that, and we've got screws like that, and underneath here we've got a block like so, and then we've got springs in there like that, which then attach to a claw which attaches to a screw like so. That makes sense, doesn't it? So what I've done at the moment is I've added tension to this by pulling this further this way as I screwed that into the block of wood. This pulled this down as hard as it can go, and it's overpowered the opposite pull of the strings, which, as we know, come from there, up there, over a saddle and off up that direction. So the strings are pulling that way, and guess what? This is pulling that way too. But it's pulling around a pivot point, which is there. That's the sort of point of rotation. So if this wins, if the strings are too great, if the strings power is too great, what happens is it goes like this. If the spring overpowers the strings, it tightens the string but pulls the block down flat on the deck, which is where we've got it right now. So normally what we're going to end up on this setup is we're in the easy thing. Let's just talk about the three kinds. So there are three kinds of positioning really. There's floating, there's down only, and then there's locked, which is where we are at the moment really. Now what I mean by locked is not strictly locked. You know, Giant could press it down and it would go like that with the arm in place. But locked, to all intents and purposes, is locked as in you can bend strings here, you can put more force on this, you could tighten up in pitch, and this still won't lift up because this is in so far that this force overcomes this force. So I know it sounds silly, but they're actually pulling over a pivot. One force is going that way, one force is going that way. Not very good. That's not a very good way of describing it, because it isn't like that, because it's going around a corner. But anyway, you can see that one's trying to go that way and one's trying to go that way, because they're just either side, basically the opposite sides of a pivot. So the fully locked thing is not really, some people like to do that. And the people that often do that are the people who usually can't understand the tremolo and or have problems with the tuning with the nut and the strings at the other end. And so the whole experience of the tremolo for them is they think that a Strat tremolo always puts the guitar out of tune, so they go, just lock it down. And those people often do things like they put a block of coins behind here, which is the ball of the thing, and they either lock it off there or they overpower the springs there and put a block there, a block of wood or whatever. So people lock off the tremolo so that it's a hard tail for the rest of its life, right? And that's fine. And whether you're brilliant at setups or not, that will give you the experience of a more stable tuning, because it's taken one of the bendy bits out of the equation. But you can see that one of the reasons I start with lockdown, no matter what is going to happen afterwards, whether the customer wants a floating tremolo, down only, or a lock later on, I always set it to lockdown first, because I do all of the action work with this lockdown. Because what I don't want in the middle of it all is the tremolo floating about, because when the tremolo floats, i.e. when this plate rises up, the action rises up as the saddles rise up. So when I'm doing the setup, I don't want the action rising and falling. I want the action low as it can be, do the setup stuff where I can address the frets in relation to the overall curvature of the neck and the compression on the neck. And then once I've done that, then I can choose later on what sort of option. And in fact, with Danny's, we're going for down only. And partly the reason for that, and the way I tend to describe it to customers, is I say, do you use tremolo in your playing style normally? And most people say, well, not really. And there's very few, well, not very few, there are relatively few people who use tremolo as an integral part of their playing. And in fact, the ones that do always immediately say yes, because they know how, they always know exactly how their playing style uses tremolo. But for everyone else, I then suggest we go for down only. And down only is this situation here, only with a little less force. So what I do is at the end of the whole setup, I will back or move this away again, loosening it or shortening this distance here, and therefore reducing the pull on the springs. And I do it until we're at just before the point where the plate would want to move. And that gives us a mostly stable tremolo plate, which won't rise up of its own account, but it gives us the lightest possible touch for a down only movement, which gives you a nice sort of shimmery tremolo sound. If you want a floating tremolo, if you desperately want a tremolo that you can work in either direction, either to go down a note, down in pitch, or to pull back and go up in pitch, then it follows that what we have to do is we have to set the tremolo to begin with in such a way that, believe it or not, it starts off raised off the deck, kind of like that. It's very bad drawing. And as you do, so the saddle rises up, the string comes up through the saddle. But overall, the string has risen up a small amount in setting this. But what's good about this is that when we do set the thing, it stays floating the whole time, and there is a fixed and known amount of upwards and downwards movement there. And that little bit of movement, it gives you your range, or your up range of bends. So notes going sharp. And then, of course, going that way gives you your down, as always. But what you've done is you've built in a degree of up bend, because the solid top of the Strat otherwise doesn't have it. So in order to bend backwards, you can't push through solid wood. So you have to start with this as your default position, and then you have a certain range of backward pitch up bending. Some guitars are designed with this already in. So a Floyd Rose sits in a recessed Floyd Rose sits just above a recess, which has all of that space built in. So the Floyd Rose, the floating Floyd Rose, starts off horizontal because it's got some space to go down into in the backwards movement. Okay, so that's the tremolo explained. And as I said to Danny the other day when she was around at my place, I pointed out that the tremolo itself, this thing invented by Leo Fender, patented by Leo Fender in, I don't know, 1952 or 3 or whatever it was. Somebody will know the exact date. When he patented this, it was a brilliant device, and it's worked perfectly ever since. All it requires in order to work perfectly is that this pivot point here is, you can see that, all it has to be, as we see from above, is a chromed series of chromed holes in the plate with a screw that goes, or screw in the wood. And what it requires the screw to be, it's not obviously in situ here, but the screw has a smooth chromed part, and then it has the threaded part, and your tremolo screw kind of looks like that. And the idea is that this face here of the screw rests against this face of the chromed hole, and those two, as long as those two things are both chromed, one will kind of move, or it's more like that, one will move very smoothly up and down against the other, and that's how it moves in operation. So as a design, this thing works perfectly well. You can mess it up, and it's often easy to do. When people make past casters, if you look around your workshop and you find another set of these, and you put them into a tremolo and you're not sure if they came from it, for example, if these are fractionally too big, then what can happen is you lose the wiggle room in this, and it starts to tighten up. As soon as the plate tightens up on those 6 screws, then what happens is it loses its freedom of movement, and it can be very subtle and you don't even see it, but those 6 screws there need to be the right size for that hole, for that tremolo. That's one of the things that will rob it of its space very quickly, the wrong tremolo screws there. The other thing, as you saw me taking care of before, and I'll just draw it out on here, another common mistake that people make when they get a Strat or something with that kind of tremolo is they don't know or don't notice that the tremolo plate, sorry, that's not a good view. The tremolo plate itself actually looks like this, close up. Okay, and that's the deck of or the body of the guitar, like so. And there's the important bit is there's a bevel at the front edge, and that bevel obviously is to allow this thing to pivot. Right? If that was solid there, it would dig a hole into the body wood here. It would get obstructed and it wouldn't work. But it would eventually try and dig a sort of lump out the top of the guitar. So the tremolo depends for its operation in that direction for a bevel on the end of the brass or the chromed brass, so that when it's pushed forward, it will sit flat on the ground like so and go up like that. Okay, and that bevel is such an angle that it caters perfectly for more angle than you'll actually need going forward. But there is a stop point, which is the line of that bevel. So you see that bevel's kind of vital for your tremolo to work, your 6-screw Strat tremolo to work. But what's fairly common is that people don't know that, so they come to tighten in their screws, which are sort of sitting, let's call them there. It's not a very good drawing, but so there's your hole, there's your chromed bit of the screw, and then there's your screwy bit of the screw. And what often happens is people tighten that up, but without realizing it, they over tighten it. And so what happens is they begin to pull this down just a fraction, and this end lifts up just a fraction. Now, if you tighten it that far, it will never sit flat at the back, okay? And you'll have problems. So that's why when I did this check, I made sure, until I discovered that the top was slightly uneven, what I did was I brought out all of those screws just a little bit. Now you'd think that wouldn't work, they're all sitting out. Well, it works perfectly well because, as you can see, there's more than enough chromed material to go through the hole, and you can still pull up. Now if you pulled these up so far that you now brought the thread up into play in here, that would obviously mess it up. But you can go back half a turn easily, or a turn, to make sure that you're not over tightening this plate and making it nose down, which is what I did to check. And the reason it's still standing up a little bit here visually is because this end here is flat on the wood, you can see it. Okay, so that's your Strat tremolo, and that's a couple of the things that people get wrong. Now of course the other thing you get wrong, which is unfair on the tremolo system because it's no fault of Fender's, there's 2 other major aspects that will make you think your Fender 6-screw tremolo is terrible and that you'd never want to use it. And that's really unfair on the tremolo. But in a sense, Fender should have, well, did know this, but they should have majored on this so that everybody who ever used one of these knew what they had to do. But it doesn't seem like they do. Not even guitar shops seem to know. This type of tremolo, any type of tremolo, depends on the two things that I call the source of your tuning stability. Right, and I'll write them down here because I always like to make this point, usually at the end of the video. Are we still charging? Oh, come on, we must be charging. Surely we're charging. Yes, we have to be. Right, there are 2 principal things that affect your tuning. One is the nut, and 2 is the unreleased slack in your strings. Right, and what's amazing about this is tuners are not responsible for your tuning stability. It's these 2 things only, and I would put them, think of them as 50% each. That's how important they are. So what do I mean by the nut? Well, if you have a nut that is non-ideal, less than ideal material that causes friction, or if the slots are too deep, and I can tell you now they are too deep on this. You do not need a great big deep slots on that nut like so. But the reason they're deep is because the people in the factory have cut them to get to the right first fret action, which is very important. But they've cut them from a nut that's fitted. And it's a logical way to do it, but it leaves the string in a deep hole, which is not necessary, and it can cause problems. Not always, but it can cause sticking problems. So it's the quality of the material, the depth of the slots, the straightness of the slots, all manner of little things can come together and prevent this from allowing the string to move freely. And it'll be causing problems before you can even sense it or hear it or know it's doing it. But what most people experience is they've got a guitar with slack still in the strings because they don't know about how to release it. They've also got a less than ideal nut, and then they try and make their tremolo work and stay in tune. And of course it won't, because these two aspects alone, the string slack and the nut, means this fella down here will find it every time. So if you've got problems there and there, this thing will just help put it out of tune. It's not its fault, it's the fault of these two things, string slack, nut. But this chap will expose it, and of course it gets all the blame because people go, they're rubbish, those tremolos, they'll never stay in tune. Take my word for it, if you get these right, these aspects, that tremolo, you'll suddenly get a new relationship with your 6-screw Fender tremolo, I promise you. But this takes hard work, and one of the things that I do all the time now is I use tusk. All right, so I'm going to replace this with a tusk nut, which has a kind of built-in lubricant, and I'm going to take the time to do it in such a way that, because I've got the right radius, it's a 9.5-inch radius, you're going to end up with the to my best abilities, the strings will be sat in these factory molded slots, not deep into hand cut slots. So I try to get the exact height right for the perfect first fret action without cutting the slots. Now occasionally where the radius is different, or where there's a tiny flaw in the depth of one of the slots, occasionally you can get this in the factory. I will resort to just fixing it with my H.E.R nut slot files, but as a principle I try to do it all from the bass upwards to get the correct the perfect playing height from the bass up. So that's one bit, and then at the end when I put the new strings on, I spend a lot of time stretching the strings out, and that takes about 20 minutes or even more to stabilize the whole thing. And that means the strings with their own slack built in, and don't forget they go all the way into there, so that it's more string than you can see, and you can't see the slack that's in the strings. And I know from experience that it'll stay in there for years until it decides, and it can be a couple of years, and it will put your guitar out of tune every time in all of that time. It's a miserable thing, and I think my experience is that when you finally get a guitar that has had the nut done, the strings stretched properly, the tremolo set properly, so there's nothing obstructing it, so the scratch plate isn't stopping it move, and so on. When you have that all done and you finally get a guitar that will stay in tune, it's a revelation, and it makes you know to spend that much time from that point onwards. Okay, so having done a couple of things here, if I'm now going to, what I've done is I've set the guitar in hardtail mode, and I'm going to cut off in a minute, come back and continue. But the order of events is going to be, I want to change the nut first, which is going to take a lot of time. I'm going to have to cut this nut out probably, just to make sure that it doesn't take any chips of wood with it, because it's very tightly fitted. Hopefully it might tap out, but I'm not entirely confident. So I'm going to replace the nut and spend all the time it takes to get the nut to the right action, and I'm going to but what I will do first is I'll just set or adjust the gross variable in all of this, which is usually the bridge saddle heights. So what I mean by gross variable is the bigger of all the different variables. So if I can actually find a suitable, it's just going to be a Mexico, so it's a Mexico sized one, isn't it? It takes an especially small thing. That's really unhelpful for British customers. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm looking, yeah, let's come back again. And this is for Danny. So Danny, your playing action is, broadly speaking, a combination of three key components. It is a combination of your, what I call the last fret action, the height here, but that's really just the height of the saddles, okay? So the last fret action adjusted here, the first fret action down here, and the relief or the curvature in your neck. Those three things together make your main experience of playing. So first fret action here, curvature of the neck, and the height of your saddles at this end. And those things together make, this is the feel of your action. When the guitar has a high action here, it's very tiring, and it makes the guitar harder to play. Bar chords down this end are needlessly tiring. Also, though, the higher that action is, it makes fretted notes go down, go sharp, played down here, which can really mess up open chords. And you can often tell a guitar where the nut slots are improperly cut and the first fret action is too high, because you will spend a lot of time tuning it to pitch, and then you'll play a D, open D chord, and you'll wonder why it sounds bad, even though you keep on tuning and it still keeps on sounding bad. A good chance that what's happened there is your first fret action's too high, and your fretting strength, which may be as low as you can make it, is still causing the frets to go sharp. Now, it's less to do with your fretting strength than it is to do with the height of this first fret action. So that's one indication. So I'm going to check that's okay. I'm going to set this to my target action for this kind of guitar, which I'm pretty, I know it's a 9.5. So I know what I can set on a 9.5. So having checked my first fret action, that's more or less right, although the first fret, the high E first fret action is not the same as the rest, oddly, but that's just a flaw in cutting it in the factory. So now I'm going to check the last fret action. I don't know how well that's showing up, and I use a simple fret height thing. Now what I need to do, and I've just realized that I need to get some more of these close-up reading glasses. They're not quite my current prescription, but they do help me see the markers on here a little bit better. So currently we've got I would say about 1.75, actually it's nearly, no, actually I say that's 2. We've got 2 millimeters there, and we've got nearly 2.5 on the high E, and that could be 1.5 and 1.2. So it's a lot of a reduction. So now I'm going to make the first reductions on this bass string, which is going to take it down quite a bit. And I'm going to, that's too low now. Now that's gone down to 1 millimeter. So now I know what half a millimeter is. It's half a turn on each grub screw, because I've worked that out before for reasons I won't go into now. But so that half turn on both grub screws should bring me to a last fret action of 1.5. It's just about spot on. Now the others I'm just going to do quickly by eye from this point, which isn't going to be perfect, but it will, as a gross movement, it will get them closer to where I want them to be, and then we'll fine tune. So the idea is set the, this one I should have done first. I've misinformed you. I should have checked the neck relief first. It's also not in tune, so let me just put it roughly in tune. It wasn't in tune before because I didn't have the tremolo locked down. String is actually going out of tune, stretching so badly. Right, so that's roughly tuned. So my first point should have been checking the neck relief, and to do that I hold the low E string on the first fret and on the last fret, and then with my thumb stretched out halfway up the neck I check to see if there's a gap. Now there is a gap, and that's, I know from experience, that's as much as I want. So the guide rule of thumb is how much gap do you need? And the answer is as little as you can get away with. So rule number one, definitely not none. So if you do that little measurement and you find the string is in the middle is already touching the fret, then it's too flat. It could even be humped, in which case it will stop the notes down here playing. But you want more than none, a little bit more than none. So if you, first of all, just the rule of thumb is you press down first and last fret on the low E, touch in the middle, you can hear it clicking, that means there's a space, you can see the space. If there's no space, you need to have some space. The space is controlled by the wood reacting to the pull of the string. So normally a set of strings will pull a curve in the wood. If the strings are too light, they might not pull a curve in the wood. The wood might be harder, stronger, stiffer than other kinds of woods and so on. Or maybe laminate and have stronger strength characteristics. So if you don't have that space, you need to dial it in, and that's where making adjustment on your tremolo adjuster, your truss rod adjuster is vital. But if it's not accessible, as it isn't there, then you face an absolute pain in the to do it. So luckily, it is the correct amount and I don't have to adjust it. But if I did, what I would do was I would put a capo on here. I'd slacken the strings right off, put a capo on there just to keep them on the neck. I would then take these screws off, holding the neck in place, take those off, hold it in place, turn it over. Then I would lift the neck out. The strings would still be loose, but they're held there. Make an adjustment. And if there wasn't enough relief, I would turn it counterclockwise a little bit. If it was too much relief and I needed to flatten it, I'd turn it clockwise a little bit. Then I put it back in, check whether that had, tune it up to pitch, check whether that had made a difference. So put it back in, do it all up tightly, tune it to pitch, recheck the space, and suddenly, oh, thankfully, yes, we've got a little space now. Is that enough? Yes, it's enough. It's more than none, and it's making a click, and I can see a small gap. Now, empirically speaking, we probably want about 0.2 millimeters maximum over the middle or 8th fret, probably, when these two are being held down. So you could get your doofers, feeler gauges under there and measure it. But it's much easier to go a tiny bit more than none works for me. So we have the first step, that's correct. Now with that, we're going to the second variable, the action at this end. So I'll continue with that. And having done a few tweaks, now I'm going to just use the gauge again at 1.5, bit over. So we're going to go 1.5 and then a tiny bit more than 1.5 and then, sorry, less, and then we'll get down to 1.2 on the high E. That's the plan at the other end. So it's difficult to accurately break that down into 6 steps, getting lower each time, but that's what we're sort of aiming to do. So there's a 0.3 spread over 5 strings. So it doesn't really work out very cleverly, but it's just it's a sort of a nod at reducing the amount. So still too high. So around on the G, I'm probably wanting to be about 1.3, something very close to that. A bit too low, but not far off. And then this one. And the B is about 1.3, and the E is about 1.3 as well, so a little bit further down on that one. Okay, so this has obviously got closer to the action I want, but it's put it out of tune in doing so. That's no surprise. Now the good thing about this is that I'm setting the action I want, and then in a minute I'm going to make the frets play at that action. So it's not normally what happens. Normally in a factory the guitar comes out with whatever amount of uneven frets the neck has, and it's totally normal for a fret to have uneven neck, to have uneven frets, because it's a crude process. It's pressing, you know, a machine or tapped by hand. You're pushing metal into a piece of wood, and then once you've done that, and even if you think they're flat, then you put the piece of wood onto here, you chuck a load of strings on, tighten them up to pitch, and the neck bends into a curve, as we saw, and it also compresses this way. So the strings are trying to pull the headstock into the bridge. It's also trying to kind of pull upwards. So there's a kind of compression on the wood itself. And that often makes these frets bunch very slightly differently to when they have no strings on them. But we're looking to make this thing play when it has strings on, when the compression is under play. And we want to, the best way to do that is to level the frets with the strings on under normal loading and the neck compressed as it will be when you load it and play. So that's why I do it this way with the strings on. And so unlike in the factory where the strings are put on and they tend to set the action as good as the underlying frets will allow, in my setup I set the action I want even if the underlying frets don't like it. So the end result might be, I'm not saying it is, but they might be some difficult notes, or they choke out. There you go. So look, there's the 12th fret high E. I'm going to write this down because it's really good to have a marker point. 12th fret high E. And what I'll show you is how this method frees that up. So we've got the action we want, but the underlying frets on this guitar will not permit a significant bend on the high E. Sorry, what was I playing on the 12th? There you go. 12th fret bent up on the high E chokes out. Now you might really, your lead guitar playing or any kind of playing might require that you can do that bend. Currently you can't, but when we do the fret leveling, you'll see that the thing that's stopping it will be some inherent unevenness over here in the kind of more or less in the G area. It might be equally uneven over here, but it's only when the string gets across there that it gets obstructed. So in the leveling, we will clear out that area where it's being obstructed, and you'll hear this note free up. And that's what's amazing about this method. Now, before I do that, I said that I'm going to remove the nut. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to park the camera for a minute. I will prepare this nut and take it off, and I'll do the other one. And I think I'm going to do it off camera just so I can let my batteries charge up. Also, I've done it on loads of other guitars, and sometimes it's a bit of hiding to nothing, because when I do this, people get really experts who have an opinion get really uptight that I have removed A, the original nut, and B, done it with, if I need to, doing it with a Dremel cutting disc, and so it can get me just a load of abuse. So what I'll do is, while the thing charges up, I'll take care of that bit, get the nut right, and then we'll come back and get ready for the fret leveling. All right, so charge up, see you in a minute. Right, so in the intervening time, I've changed the tuners over. I had to ream the holes a bit bigger, put a tusk nut on, tapped out the original nut, sized this one down. It's got about 0.2 of a millimeter lowering required, but I'll do that after I've done the fret leveling. So we've got the frets painted black with marker pen, ready to level, and everything else is good. We know it's all where we wanted it from before. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get ready, zoom out a bit, get ready to level. So before I level, I check in my head 3 things. Relief, yes, there's some in there, as much as we wanted before. Very good. First fret action, it's a little high right now, but it's not critical. It doesn't play any real role in the leveling. And last fret action is good, tuned up, ready to go. So here I go with the leveling process, and it's a bit miraculous and wonderful, but it's very straightforward. The reason I do this kind of leveling is because it allows me to only level as much as I need to level to make the chosen action play. Now that may seem like a weird thing to say, but you don't play without, or you don't play with zero action. You always have a certain height, let's call it, you know, height at the first fret, a certain amount of curvature, and a certain height at the last fret. So you're not really, there's no point leveling the frets below that action. You're just taking away metal just for the sake of being able to tell yourself that even at a zero action the frets are perfectly level. Well, like I say, we don't go to a zero action, we go to 1.5, 1.2 at the high E. And so I'm going to now lower or level the frets only to the action we've chosen. So that's first of all less expensive in fret metal, and it's much better because I can tell what's happening. You know, it gives me a really clear look. That's what's happening now. So straight away, what I do is I stop my leveling, and it's never the best angle from here. The camera never quite sees what I can see, but I think you might be able to see straight away there's a high fret, and on a maple board it's quite interesting because the high frets reveal themselves pretty quickly with a little patch of dust. So there's the high fret, there's a sort of puff of another one, and there's sort of one down at number 2 with a little puff of dust. Now the others you can see are cutting just a tiny little bit. That gives you an idea of the general up and downiness of the thing. So I would say we're sort of we're cutting a little high there, same here, a little lowish there in this section here, but still cutting, so it's not too bad. A little bit back up to normal, let's call it there, high there, normal, lowish, normal, low, low right at the end. So it tells us straight away, gives us a pretty good idea of the topography of the neck. Now that's hardly any leveling at all. And what I don't need to do is, I don't need to make them all cut up with the 400 grit paper. What I want to do is I want to make sure all these notes, and then a bit later on all the bends, play the way I want them to. So here's my chosen action, everything's the way that Danny's going to play it. One note right at the top there is just a little bit, don't know why that is, it's not quite sure why that is, but it's low on here, but it shouldn't be making the next one high. So what I'll do is I'm just going to do a little bit more leveling now, and I'm just focusing my attention, same beam, same calibration, just focusing a bit more attention on the top end of the fretboard, knowing that there's a little bit, and what I'm getting actually is I'm getting one high fret out of those last few, so that was probably, should take care of that. The other thing about this method, which of course you can't do with the other leveling methods, is you can put the strings straight back in and check by playing. That's a little low spot there. So I'm going to concentrate on this last one. Now when you hit a low fret makes the next fret effectively high, or relatively high. So it's the low frets, funnily enough, on your neck that tend to dictate what's going on. So there's a low fret here in between two reasonably normal frets, but because of that, when you fret that note in, you're fretting in a ditch, effectively. And if you don't want it to go zing, you only have two choices, or choke, you only have two choices. You either raise the action on your guitar, which is obviously not what we're in the business of doing, or you level the others around the low fret until it just bottoms them out a little bit. Okay, I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to use I'll do the B track, as I call it, and it will, when I get to the G track, I'll concentrate on the those big bends. So I kind of expect, as I do the B track, I tend to expect well, it tells me whether any high frets continue over this direction across the radius, and it's no guarantee that they will, because quite often you might have high frets at the edge or low frets at the edge where they've been, perhaps somebody's hammered them in a bit harder. And so what I'm seeing here now is a high one there-ish, crop of high ones here, and about all the same here. So that's not too bad. But again, it's just by reading the tea leaves, or the dust I should say. I'll just check the action on his. Oh, I know. I've just done something. I need to readjust. Do I? No. I've changed the action. 1.5. Slightly over. Actually, it's not bad. These are now sitting up a bit high. I basically took the strings off and the bridge sat back in a slightly different position. Now it's raised up at the front a bit more than I would want, but actually it hasn't made any significant change to the action, other than I think that one's always going to be too high anyway. 1.5, 1.4. That one's a bit low. Anyway, just making a small tweak. Right, come back to that. So now I've done the B track, and I'm pretty sure everything plays. Sounds pretty good. What I'm going to do now is calibrate the G track, and this is kind of a critical one for the bends, but only because it's the geometry of the neck. So you think when you bend a note it goes across the fret towards the center of the fretboard, but it's not just going across in this direction, it's also going uphill, which is why it has a strange effect of reducing the amount of free action or space between the string and the following frets, which is kind of odd. And it seems to be why it chokes out on the G's particularly, because the string, when you're bending it, tends to end up at the highest point on the G track, or highest point on the fret, which is in the G track. So what I'm just doing now is I'm just looking to make sure this all levels out nicely. And again, higher spot in the middle here and a low spot there, but not too bad, but we should be all right. Let's try the bend, the high E bend. Now the thing about this is, you might be thinking, well, if there's one low fret somewhere, like we found one, doesn't that mean we have to take everything around it, or everything on the board, down? Well, yes, the truth is yes, if you don't want to raise the action. So we were, look at that, 12th fret, high E bend. Crikey. That's cleared. So that bit of leveling in the G track has cleared up the choke on the bend. So that's brilliant. Now we're going to do the D track. So this this method is something that I didn't invent. It's something I learned about 8 years ago, and I learned it by I bought a tool from a person who had, I guess, developed it, the technique, and he made an elegant tool, which I still have on a shelf out there, but doesn't get used. And there's a long-winded reason why it doesn't get used. But anyway, he developed this tool, and I guess just trying to keep it as short as possible. I looked at it and I thought, how do you know that can't work? What on earth, blah, blah, blah. And I got completely, you know, I couldn't visualize how it worked or how it could work and so on. So I got skeptical to begin with. And then I sort of stuck with it. Somebody lent it to me and I stuck with it and tried it out. And I thought, oh, right, you know, it dawned on me how it worked. So I became a convert to that method, and I could see why it was good. Now a little bit of fret slap around here, and that we know is the high spot of the guitar because we've come across that before. So I'm going to concentrate around that area here with a little bit more leveling. Anyway, yes, so I became a convert to this thing, and I just went straight ahead using it, and I was absolutely singing its praises in my videos, and you know, totally happy, blah blah blah. And of course I was new to it, so I hadn't figured out all of the benefits of that particular method, but I could, you know, I was just so happy to use it, and I was promoting it and just telling everyone, go and buy it, you know. And at about 150 quid, that was I wasn't getting paid to recommend it. I like to recommend things that I think are good, and I really thought that was good. And I wrote to him foolishly and told him, just thank you so much for inventing this thing. It's absolutely brilliant. You know, I've used it on this video and I've recommended it to all my followers, and you know, hopefully you'll get some great sales. And you know, because I made a point of saying I've got about 7,000 at the time. I had about 7,000 subscribers. Anyway, now to be honest, I didn't expect like a ton of thank yous, but I didn't expect what happened next. And what happened next is there was a gap for about a week. He didn't answer, and then he came back with what I immediately could see was a worried, not happy text or a message, email, and I couldn't figure it out. I thought, okay, well, it wasn't very clear. His English was a second language, but he started to tell me that I'd used the wrong words and I shouldn't be saying that about the thing, and blah 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 blah. And I kind of read through and I thought, oh, okay, maybe he's thinking maybe he thinks I'm using it wrong, and I can maybe understand that. But you know, I sort of spoke back to him and I said, you know, I hope you don't mind me saying, but you know, I was happy with your tool, and I was happy to promote you, and actually, you know, I didn't expect a ton of thanks, but I didn't expect you to. The first word from you was to come back and criticize and tell me I couldn't use this word or that word. And I sort of said to him in a sort of gentle way as I could manage. I said, look, you know, I'm not your PR employee. You know, I mean, I'm allowed to use whatever words I like, and as it happens, if I thought your tool was terrible, which I don't, by the way, but let's say even if I did, it's entirely my right, having bought it, you know, to tell my followers I think it was terrible or whatever, you know. But even though that's my right, I didn't even dislike it. I think it's brilliant, you know. So I don't quite understand why. Anyway, I tried to reason with him, and each message from him got worse and more angry. And he then started to tell me that it was because I was showing the tool in too much of the tool in my videos, which is why the Chinese would be able to copy it and stealing the food out of his baby's mouths, and you know, ruining him, and you know, and he kind of told me a whole load of stuff about how difficult he was finding it to get his patent, whatever, you know, or how frightened he was that the Chinese were going to steal it, and you know, and I just thought to myself, well, yeah, I get it, you know, patenting something and protecting your intellectual property is a very difficult thing to do, I'm sure, but don't take it out on me. You know, if you don't mind. You know, I just like it, and I was just, oh, okay. And you can tell, well, you can imagine that by that point in time, I was sick and tired of being spoken to abusively, and it really was. He called me the devil or something in one of his emails. And it came to a final head, and I just said, you know what? I said, I've been in business for quite a long time, you know, in various different kinds of business. And I said, what you've managed to do just now is quite astonishing. You've managed in the space of about 2 weeks of emails to turn me from the warmest possible advocate for your product and somebody who could bring you untold number of sales, you know, because people, you know, certainly on Facebook and YouTube, people will take heed of a recommendation I make if they see that I'm using it and I really like it. And I said, you in 2 weeks you've turned me from an advocate, warmest possible advocate and fan of your thing, to an enemy. You know, you've made an enemy out of me. And I said, you can't do customer service like that. And when I said the word customer, I think he then decided that if he refunded me, although I didn't ask for it, he clearly thought if he refunded me, I would no longer be a customer, and therefore he could treat me badly. So, without asking, he refunded me the 150 quid, and that was the end of that. And I was left with the tool, which I absolutely wouldn't use. I refused to go on my channel and recommend it to people. I thought, not a chance on earth. But I was left with a problem. Now, just for your information, I'll come back to the story in a minute. You see these levelings here, right? So don't panic. This is quite within the normal leveling. These frets, by the way, are plus side for this model of guitar. They haven't done any fret leveling on these frets, which is good. So I'm doing the first leveling on many of the other models in this sort of price range. Some of them, for some reason, they've already done a basic fret level. But not on this one. So I'm the first fret leveling, so this is not at all a bad amount to take, in case you're panicking. Now, what I will show you though is you can see that on this side it's taken more, and this is because at this sort of action, which most of my customers want, because the heavy wound strings move more and the frets are uneven underneath, which they are on any guitar, they tend to spin and hit the frets, clip the frets, which I call fret slap as opposed to fret buzz. And to get rid of that fret slap, which tends to follow your notes all the way up the neck, especially on the wound thicker strings, you do have to do that much leveling to make them play at that action. And I'm not singling out Fender any more than any other company. If I did a set of frets, I would need to do the same thing. It's not their fault. I'm not making them out to be useless at it. It's just the way it is with frets. But they haven't done it, and consequently their guitar can't be played at that low action that Danny, for example, wants, or a lot of customers want. There is another aspect about this guitar, is I think the spacing is a little bit too narrow for this, and it's not at the nut end, it's the bridge end. I don't quite understand Fender sometimes. This is I don't even measure it. Let's measure it just for argument's sake. This bridge has a certain spacing. It's probably Mexico, it's probably 54, but no, in my luck it'd be 52, just to make me look like a monkey. Let's just get it as close as I can. Oh, no way. Well, that's why. That's a... Well, it's looking like 56, but it can't be. So you know what? Let's try it on the... I can't quite reach any of these things right now. I think it's close to 56. That's too wide for this neck. I don't know why they do it. They should have done a 54 or even a 52.5. Well, 52.5 might be a bit too narrow, but 54 would have given about a millimetre or so back either side there. And one of the reasons I think this is too wide is because you won't be able to see it probably from the angle I'm going to show you, but I'm trying to be directly above. Where's the camera? There it is. So from directly above, can you see how the high E doesn't really sit very well over the pole? So I think this is too wide a bridge for this, but who knows why. I mean, maybe H.E.R. has it on, specified it. I don't think H.E.R. would have specified it, because I don't think anyone in their right minds would have also specified a heel mounted or heel located truss rod adjuster. Never mind this. So this looks like 56 spacing, which puts it pretty close to the edge here, and the kind of positioning, well, you've got not a lot of wriggle room. I think this is not bad positioning for the bridge. I mean, they've done a good job in placing that, but it doesn't give us an awful lot of wiggle room. And I mean, potentially I could make a small adjustment to the neck position here, but it would really only make a fraction of a different millimeters difference. So I'm not sure I want to put it under pressure just for that. Obviously what matters is it's playable. That's the main thing. But it's just a funny observation. I wouldn't have put a 56mm, or if you wanted a 56mm spacing here, then you make a slightly wider neck. That's my, or a neck heel. That's my feelings. Anyway, right, so look, I've done the leveling, and so now it's time to remove these strings that have done their service, and the next stage will be to recrown the frets, and after that I'll probably go off camera again because it'll be time to polish the sand and polish the frets out, but I'll show you the recrowning first. So if you think about it, again, I'm thinking, if you've watched my videos before you'll know this stuff, but thinking of Danny here, when you level some frets, what you do effectively is UM. So what we've done is we've taken the neck here. That's not blue, that's green. Okay, and we've taken the frets. Let's say the one was there and then one was low, for example. What we've done is we've gone along and we've leveled off the frets like that, and so we've taken the top off that fret there, and you can't even see it in this terrible lighting. There we are. We've done that. And so what we don't want is to leave it like that, because if the fret is left like that, what happens is on the top of a normal shaped, arch shaped fret, the intonation central point, if you like, or the launch point is there. So if you go from bridge to there, you've got a certain distance, and that's the vital distance for intonation. Equally here, you'd also have that on the original fret, but because we flattened it, it's now moved it to there instead, and so the next length is reduced. Okay, so we call that length 1 and we'll call that length 2 for the fun of it. So that length is reduced. It's not going to be the same as length 1 anyway, but it should be that length there, right? And if it's shorter, which it now is because of this flat spot, what's going to happen is that the strings will sound slightly, or the note will be very fractionally out of tune. So what we have to do is we have to recrown the fret, which means we take the existing fret and we do this, right? We create a new fret within that existing material. So you can see that that will also be the same height and shape then as that one. And what we do is use a concave file which sits over the fret kind of like this, right? There's the fret file. And what it does first of all is it just takes off these sticky out edges where it's the flat, it rounds off the flat part of the fret, and you can see by the shape of the file it imposes another nice arch shape on it. And what we do is we use it in such a way as to not cut any lower, and we use the marker pen again to know whether or not we've touched the top of the fret. And as long as we don't touch the top of the fret, then we are in good shape, because we haven't lowered it any further. So let's take these strings off, continue taking the strings off, and we'll give them a cut. Those hip shot tuners are very nice. Oh, anyway, sorry, I was going to go back to the story, wasn't I? Yes, so, sorry, I get distracted, as you can imagine. Yeah, so I was stuck with this thing, and it's sitting out there on the shelf, not being used, because I was absolutely damned if I was going to carry on, because not least if I'd have carried on using it, I was absolutely certain that I would have been the object of more attention from this guy. Now, funnily enough, it's not the first person's luthier tool that I'd used, raved about, and then got abused for. So this was a very familiar, weird thing that happened twice, and both times I thought, no, I can't use this thing now, thanks. And of course, I after the second time with the leveling tool, I realised that I cannot put my head above the parapet and talk to the makers of such a tool any longer. You know, if there's something about it I like, then I'm not going to say anything, because it costs me too much grief. Because I think what happens is the inventors of these things are stressed. They're going through all kinds of things, and I think it's my experience that if you put your head up and you're on a video or you run a YouTube channel, you become a central or focus point for them. And if there's anything about what you do that they don't agree with, it's too easy to map all the frustrations on, like this guy did, and somehow me actually showing the tool in my video was a chance for the Chinese to see it and therefore copy it. It's like, well, are you literally expecting the Chinese never to see this tool? You're going to put an embargo on every single one you sell, that nobody is ever allowed to use it in public. You know, it just was ridiculous. Anyway, so I thought, I'm not going to use it. I absolutely cannot be using it. But then I thought, well, what do? I need to do the same method, because I'm convinced about the method. So as it happened, I thought, well, how hard would this be to make? And so I got myself a truss rod, because basically the original thing, it's like a truss rod inside of a sort of stiffening frame. It's a bit sexy. It means you can actually do it with the strings on. You don't even have to move one string aside like I do on my makeshift one. But anyway, more about that in a minute. So I basically made one, started using it, just an ordinary truss rod from a salvaged or broken, actually I'd bought on eBay. Somebody had literally hacked sword through a square neck. Definitely hadn't got through the truss rod. They'd given up when they hit the truss rod with their, I don't know what it was, their coping saw or something. Anyway, so I had this basic square truss rod and I put it to work, and lo and behold, it did the job, and I carried on using it. And I was secretly very pleased, because I just thought, actually that's my revenge, that I can continue doing this technique, which I thought was great, and I told him I thought it was great. You know, what a piece of genius to come up with it. I carried on using it, and I wasn't dependent on him, and I didn't have to put up with any of his unpleasantness. So I thought it was a win. And then I suppose my chance for true artistic revenge came a bit later, when I wrote an ebook on how I did my setups, including how to make and use your own tool, which I call the banana, in a sort of tongue-in-cheek, or a tongue stick out, a little poking tongue at the original tool. A similar name rhymed with banana. Anyway, so I called mine the banana because it's bent and bendy and so on and so forth. Anyway, and since then I've been using, I suppose for about a year or two, I used the original truss rod that I had from the Squire. But then a bit later on I found this U-channel one. I actually got this one from StewMac, but they're available in Europe and different places. But this is just a truss rod inside an aluminium U-shaped box, and this does the job brilliantly, because what I realized as time went by is that the stiffer the unit was, the more it held its shape, the better it was for removing that type of buzz that I called fret slap earlier on. And so that as I developed using this U-channel truss rod as my default banana, I started to be able to kind of refine my experience with this method, and also it led to that definition of these two different kinds of fret buzz, the that I use as a working definition for me, fret slap and fret buzz, and it allowed me to take care of both using the same tool, just with a little bit of a slightly different mindset on as I came to do it. So I've been basically using that method and learning from it myself over the last 8 years, and I still think it's a great way to do it. It's better by far still than any technique, and funnily enough, I have already now a number of customers who've said to me it's better than the Plek treatment that they paid for on the same guitars, and didn't like or didn't find that the technique had even worked well on their guitars. So, you know, it's a very good, well, that was also a very good encouragement to carry on using it. So, you know, and I'm very clear that it's not my method. You know, people say, God, your method is genius. Well, it came from this guy, you know, who made a tool based around it. But sadly, he was such a pillock, I couldn't carry on using it his. And had I done, then, you know, I'm sure a few thousand more possibly people would have bought them from him than have. And actually, interestingly, I did finally come across somebody else who said, did you learn it from the tool? And I said, yes, for various reasons I couldn't continue using that tool. And he said, I know exactly who you mean. What an absolute nightmare. So it was very validating to know that somebody else had struggled. I think he'd had almost the same experience, which is incredible. Anyway, so that was the long-winded story of the tool. It's very hard to tell a short version because it doesn't make any sense that you find a great tool and then you stop using it suddenly. It demands an explanation, and I try to do it in a way that I don't want to be insulting to the guy. You know, I reckon, you know, even when people are nasty, I always kind of try and see the best in them. You know, even if it means doesn't mean I have to continue to deal with them, but you know, I try to give them the benefit of the doubt, or you know, look at them through a compassionate or sympathetic light. And so I did with this guy, and I really do think that he was in a terrible state at the time about his. It was clear from not so much what he said, but how he talked about it. Seemed to me obvious that he was struggling to run. You know, maybe he'd gone from being a guitar player to being a guy with a good idea, and then, you know, I guess he wasn't by genetics a businessman. I don't know, but it seemed that he was struggling to capitalize his invention. And do you know what? My heart goes out to him. I mean, he came up with a device and a method which is great, and I could explain to anyone, hopefully in this video I could explain to anyone why it's such a good method. However, he had to do all of that stuff, and he had to know how to relate to customers and treat them with respect and decency, and he had to know how to deal with the cutthroat world of business where the Chinese, yes, are waiting to nick your every invention because they don't even care about copyright. So it doesn't matter whether you know, I mean, in this day and age, you have to have a strategy for capitalizing this product. If you invent that thing, you have to capitalize it knowing that the Chinese will copy it and flood the market with it from AliExpress. You still have to find a way that people buying it from you equals a good enough and confidence-inspiring enough experience that they will pay 150 quid and trade with you and not pay 35 quid and buy it unknown from AliExpress. And that was what was the sad part about all of this, is that, you know, having made one myself immediately afterwards, I suddenly thought, well, actually his business model is very shaky because, as you can imagine, not only can I copy it within 5 minutes of thinking about it, which is, and it might not look quite as nice as his, but actually it was as effective, I would argue. So not only could I make a working version of it, which was as effective, I could also it also did as good a job, and I could do it for £0. I could just take an old truss rod out of a broken neck. So imagine if your business model was based, what I concluded was that, given that if I was trying to market a tool that anyone could make themselves, then you have to market it on, either I'm saving you the time, because yes, you could make it yourself, but hellfire, here's my sexy looking one, and it saved you the hour or so you might have to make your own. And then you're not saying, hey, this is only I can make you this tool. You're saying you could make it yourself, but I know you don't really want to. Let me make it for you, and here's this and here's that goes with it, and I'll make it easy for you to get started, and here's a book I wrote about how to use it best, and so on. You add all this value to your product, because truth is, if the Chinese can copy it in a week and they don't care about the copyright and they're going to market it and sell it anyway, you've got to trade on the added value. And he didn't. And not only didn't he do that, he also didn't. The other thing that would have meant that I would have happily bought from him had he not treated me badly, and that's the biggest lesson of all, is actually his tool was totally copyable, but I still would have bought it from him, and I still would have recommended it to my followers, even if they could possibly make one themselves. I would have recommended it if he had treated me great and made my experience of buying from him and then communicating with him about how much I enjoyed using it and how much I'd promoted it in my video. If he'd have made all of that a good experience, of course I would have bloody well never made my own, And so it seemed to me that his whole approach was just doomed, really. And I know it's still out there, and I think some people still buy it, but it must have been a million times harder than it needed to be, I think. Because it's not a very strong business model if it can only work if you hope the Chinese don't see it on Sam Deeks's video, And I kind of remember, it's sort of like how I would play chess as a kid, and I was never any good at chess, and I couldn't be bothered to get good at it. So I used to come up with these few moves, and I used to hope, I was the kind of player that would aim for something and then just hope you hadn't spotted a mistake you made or what I was doing or whatever. I was a terrible player. But that's the best I could get to in strategy, and I feel his approach made me feel like that about this tool. That it was all dependent on people not knowing, not discovering that he was angry, worried, resentful, whatever. Anyway, so that's how I invented my version, and that's how I used it, really, and developed how I used it over the next 8 years or so. And I still get people arrive and go, that's ridiculous, you should take the neck off and you should do it the way that luthiers have always done it, la 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 la, and so on. And as I've said many times, I always reply with something that's to the tune of, honestly, if it works for me and my customers, do you really expect me to change because you think it's the wrong way? I mean, honestly. Of course they do. That's how the dogmatic thinking goes. Right, well, I've been telling you the unfortunate story of the tool. Where is it anyway? I'm just going to have a quick look. Oh, here it is. Hold on. Look, I'll show it to you. Ho, ho, ho. Here it is. Quick look, a quick flash. You don't want to go and buy one of those because it's expensive. And it's covered in dust because it never gets used. I thought for about one day of, shall I use it off camera? I thought, no, I will learn to make my own. And there's my own. It works brilliantly. All right, I'm going to do some sanding out of these frets now. I've leveled them, I've re-crowned them, and now is the time to sand and polish them out. And that's going to take about 40 minutes of hard work. I'll also do some work on this, and I'm going to take it down by 0.2 of a millimeter. And I'm going to do it, I'm going to use this block. Now this is a just a little, well, am I nervous? This is a great little invention. We're in the same game here. A reloved friend, name of Bob, sent me a set of these things, and I think it's a great idea. I'm probably using it wrong because there wasn't a guidebook and we didn't really talk much about it after he sent them, but I kind of went at it with my, tried to use it common sense approach to what it would do. Now, what he made was a series of these great little blocks, laser printed. So it's got a 9.5 convex and a convex, concave. Concave is good for shaping the top of a nut. Convex is good for shaping the underside of a nut. And here I have to take 0.2 mils off, for example. Now, on a curved base nut, which this is, it's very impossible to do, well, very difficult to do that by hand. But what I can do is I can get my measuring things and I can check on measurement. So I've had the nut on there and I've measured the string height on there. Now I'm going to get myself a measurement here. So call it 3/8, just laying it on the slot, 390. So I'm going to draw a quick diagram of this nut so I can visualize it. 390 on the treble side and into the slot on the bass side, and I'm going to call that 350 on the bass side. So I need to take this down 0.2. And what did I say it was? 390. Just double check. 390. Yeah, 390. Minus 0.2 is 370. So 370 on the treble side is where I'm aiming for, and 3.30 on the bass side. That's 20 off each. So the good thing about this is it allows me to shape the bass. The bad thing about using this as a gripper, it's only really a device for holding it. It's not really any good to rub against the thing because you will cut away, as you can see. This gets cut away. So it can be really helpful for just holding it in place. Another way I've used these, especially when I have to measure every 2 seconds, right? So is to hold it like this, and it's again less than ideal, but I tend to give it a go. So I hold it like that and drag it, and I'm looking to make sure that the shape of the base of the nut is nice and perpendicular or square to the top, square to the front side. That's the most important thing. And it looks at the moment a little bit leaning, so I'm going to kind of put a bit of extra weight on the back and try and catch up. And again, like all of the sanding, this is very much a trial and error sort of approach. But it's very important to get this right, because if we don't, then the nut won't sit at the height we want. And remember, I'm trying to use these slots without putting a... I could just put this in now and take down the difference with the nut files, but I'm trying not to do that because I want to get factory slots used instead. So 3, I still appear to be, God, this is all over the place. 3, it was 390 a minute ago, wasn't it? 388, that was 350, that's still about the same. So it's not really hardly working. So one way you can do it is you could put it on and run it like so, kind of across the grain. So you can see that for a curved bottomed nut, this is actually quite difficult. Taking it down is quite difficult unless you put it in that holder, that gripper, but you have to take it in and out every time you've done a bit of sanding, and you've really got it's too much faff really. So I'm going to just try and do it with the holding business. It's still showing me 390. It's even more than I started. No, 350. So barely any. I mean, if we were going to go and try and move a bit more earth, because we can see how slowly it's moving it, we'll go and put it in the what's it side, the curved side. again, as I say, it's a nice idea, this, but unless I wore all of this away, then I could probably, you know, easily run it on there, but it would take away the plastic as well. So now what I've got is a nut that's probably a little bit easier to hold in place and do a bit more firm sanding. So, and of course, if I overcut it, then I'm screwed, because I don't have any way of knowing without stopping and checking. So it is really hit and miss, unfortunately. That's still showing just under 390, but still not that much. And this is probably now 350, just under 347. So we can do some more. As you can see, I don't really have a strong sense of when's right and when isn't. It'd be nice if you could get it and sink it down to a point where only the amount you need to reduce is sticking up, and then you could just go until it was flush with the thing. That would sort of technically be the best thing, but you'd always be taking down this block at the same time. Right, so that's the bass end, that's the treble end, and I need to be sure I'm doing both. So bass end, treble end. So keeping it level now is just a matter of chance, really. There's no guarantee this is cutting smoothly. It's sort of almost better to do it by hand to be able to keep an eye on that. Still, it's a good idea in principle. Let's have a look. This doesn't appear to be going down at all at this end. This can't be the case. Okay, 383 has gone down. Where are we going to? 370, and that's down at 340. So we've got about 10th of a mil on each of them, so I could do it one more time in there. And then, now of course, if you get this wrong, then the next thing we have to do is shim, very slightly shim the nut again, just to get it up. And it's quite often the case that you can go a minute fraction of a millimetre too far, and then you're ending up slightly shimming the thing, which is a pain. But that's how it goes. It doesn't. It's not an exact science, I'm afraid. The simplest way is to just put the slightly tall nut in and use the nut files to bring it down. But I'm always trying to avoid that. It seems a bit of a fight. Okay, what have we got here? I think according to this, it's 376 at a push, and here it's 336. I'm going to stop there just to be on the safe side. I don't want to take any more than I have to. We're slightly north of the target, but that's fine. I'll come back to that. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording for a minute. I'm going to do the polishing out. Actually, I could just carry on. It's still just stopping side. Let's carry on. It's just noisy, that's all. So forgive me if this gets noisy. So what am I going to do first? Okay, first of all, here's what I do. I'm going to take my first piece of 400 grit, and I'm just going to run a little bit up and down, backwards and forwards on each of these to just knock back the biggest scratches. And I'm doing about the same amount. It's not scientific, but about the same amount to each pair of frets. And then 3 in a line now. And then 3 again. So this is just an attempt to just get the first layer of scratches off, and then with the same 400 grit piece I tend to do a hand sanding to begin with, and some people have always said to me, why do you do that? And I just like to. I like to feel my way, and while I'm feeling my way I get a good look at the frets themselves. I'm also rolling my fingers over the edges to catch the very edges of the frets as well, so that I can soften them a little bit as I go. And then once I've done this, I tend to go use a block, and then it's a very boring, repetitive process, which I've decided to inflict on you for the sake of thrilling video content. Okay, first sheet. So we've got all of these sheets, and then the next thing after that is we've got, oh right, a load of new stuff. What's it called? Micromesh. A new set of micromesh kicking in today. Right, foam block. So here we go, 400 grit on the foam block. And this goes on and on and on. It's no longer, it's not a very good shape. Which is a better shape? Let's use this one, probably better. So I've got two pieces of each grade of paper. So we're on 400 grit now. I'm just going to cover over this end because otherwise dust will go in there. We don't need it to. So 400 grit, two sheets of that. 2 squares. And then 600, 2 squares, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. This weekend was supposed to be my mum's 81st birthday, and we were supposed to go up there. There was going to be quite a big party and music and catering, and obviously not finishing late, but finishing early-ish. So we kind of got all mentally ready for that, which is a pretty long drive. And I'm not a great fan of long drives at my age. Just don't like them at this age. So we were going to go to that, and I had got prepared to play and sing 4 or 5, 6 songs that Mum wanted to hear. But unfortunately, a family crisis occurred, and we aren't able to go. So that sort of knocked that on the head. Anyway, that's still not resolved. It's one of my brothers is in hospital after a DVT with sepsis. I don't know whether they've successfully switched off the machines and got him breathing on his own yet or not. Waiting to hear from other family members. Right, that's the paper stuff done. Well, the people on the waste disposal facility left outside my door today an ancient Italian mandolin. Many strings missing, but hey, look at that. A few bits of the inlays gone, but actually could be touched up and glued down a bit more. It's a sweet old thing. It's the neck split at some point, been repaired or something. I don't even know whether. I think it has. Maybe not. Maybe, who knows? Anyway, look at that for an ancient thing. Great big, well, in ancient brass tuners, the original tuners. I've seen a few of these, but they've been tuners have been replaced. But these are the original ones. I mean, useless original ones. It's a J.F. Strident from Napoli. So that's nice. Just left outside. I think they bring me anything they guitar like that they find in the recycling centre. Very kind of them. I should put up a note saying, "Why, thank you." So now we're on to micro mesh, which is now going to run from 1500 to 12,000. This micro mesh seems to be getting flimsier each time I buy it. Twice as expensive and flimsier. It's like the chocolate bars that you used to have as a kid. They've reduced them in size and changed how they are, and it's just, this just gets smaller and smaller, and I have to cut the pieces into smaller size pieces because it's so expensive now. They say that, or I saw a YouTube video where a guy said and appeared to prove, or did an experiment to show that the brushed aluminium scratch plate apparently supposed to make quite a big difference to the tone of the guitar. And I don't think I watched it massively closely, so I'm not 100% sure he did or didn't do the experiment by using exactly the same guitar and changing out the same electrics onto a different plate and everything else being equal. I'm not sure whether he did that or not. I would have hoped he did. But the verdict generally was held to be that the plastic had a much thinner, sparkier, high frequency, snappier sounding tone to the guitar than the brushed aluminium, which had a noticeably duller, darker, warmer tone than when it had the plastics. But I'm not 100% sure, without going back and re-watching it, whether it was the exact same guitar or a loaded pickup with same make pickups, or but yeah, I mean, maybe it does. Who only knows? Right, We're at the last two sheets, 8012. So once I've done this, it'll be a matter of cleaning everything down, cleaning up the board, get rid of all dust, and then we will fit, or we'll check the nut. No, we'll have to check the nut height when we put the strings on. We have to go with it because that's the height we're stopping at. Yeah, we'll put the new strings on and then we'll stretch those out, and then we'll finally intonate, and after intonation we'll just set the tremolo to down only mode. Final tweaks. So here we go, off with the protective paper. Probably said on lots of videos, but some people get freaked out about fret dust and pickups. Fret dust is not magnetic. I did an experiment with fret wire and a very powerful neodymium magnet, and the magnet completely, or the standard nickel steel, as we call it, fret wire, had absolutely zero magnetic attractive, or it doesn't get attracted by the powerful magnet at all. The only one that did, stainless steel of course didn't, the only one that did, proving it has a higher ferrous content, was Evo Gold, and even that was the faintest magnetic attraction on this super powerful magnet. There was no sort of clang, it was just sort of a piece of fret wire had dangling somewhere, it just sort of leaned towards it a tiny bit. But a regular fret wire is not attracted by magnet, and nor is the dust. So therefore nor is the dust. And people go, but what, I know you're wrong. And what they usually mean is wire wool can clog up your magnets. And some manufacturers claim that it will, if wire wool gets inside your pickups, apparently it decays or rusts in a certain way that the windings don't, obviously being copper, and the rust inside there can break or interfere with the conductivity of the magnet. I totally get that. That's totally true, or totally believable. But if that's the case, then we're talking about wire wool fragments, which are little tiny tiny metal, ferrous iron. What's the word here? Iron. It's like iron filings, isn't it? So yeah, I have no problem understanding that you don't want wire wool in your pickups, but I don't use wire wool, very, very rarely, and if I do, I'm very conscious to keep it out of the pickups. But with fret leveling dust, there is zero magnetic attractability of it, so there's nothing to worry about. And if you get dust from the leveling process, you just blow it and clean it off with this, like a cloth with naphtha, as I'm doing here. So there's nothing to freak out about. But wire wool, yes, be much more careful. Now what I'm going to aim to do with this here naphtha is I want to clean off the fingerboard as best I can, because sometimes there's still a bit of marker pen on the side of the frets, which we want to try and get off as well. Now naphtha is, or Coleman's cooking fuel is naphtha, which is a very safe solvent when it comes to guitar finishes, and it doesn't do any harm to. Oh, I can see this. Yeah, there is a bit of about that on the side of the frets. There is still some. I was praising it, wasn't I? There's still some finish clogged up, which I'd prefer was gone, but it's stuck to the fret. Honestly, Fender, I mean, I sort of get why, because they overspray the frets. After they put the frets on, then spray the finish. But you do get left with this crusting finish that goes up over the fret. I don't really want to be ending up hand scraping each fret at this rate, so that was the one that stood out really. There's another one there. Having said that, it's a lot better than for example, the Meteoras that I had several of them in one after another, and they were just terrible. Don't like this. Don't like this. Right. Okay. Yeah. So the Meteoras, they had a very amber finish as well. So they'd gone very heavy with the amber clear, trans amber sort of colour. But as a result, it stuck. It really was draped up the sides of the frets like some sort of carpet, and it was all right up to the crowns of the frets. Of course, they had done a tiny bit of levelling with a block by the looks of it, and so it probably looked even worse because the kind of the amber finish crawled up the sides and then sort of stopped and was cracked off on the top. Which didn't look that good either, although you'd prefer it was removed rather than still on there. But anyway, so that's that. Now, I think I need to fit the nut when the strings are out of the way, even though it's scary because I haven't measured it, but we've done our reduction of height, and that's all we can do really. So it's pretty snug fit. I'm just going to put the smallest tab of glue on it. If I can reach the glue. Maybe not that small a dab. Come on. You don't really get a lot of wiggle room on these things. You've got to get it in and lined up straight off. Alright, so that's the nut in place. Get that out of the way. So now we're going to get the 8s on, and I'm going to be very reluctant to stretch those 8s too hard because I don't have any more 8s and I can't afford to break them. And that will delay the whole thing because I'll have to wait for more 8s. So oh, actually, no, this is why I bought Rotor Sound. Oh, duh. Knowing how easy it is to break them when you're stretching them the way I do, I bought Rotor Sound because they have a free spare 8, which I will include in the guitar case for Danny if I don't break it. So let's, first of all, put through the ones. Now, these Rotor Sound, you have to get your head round. Oh, it's not the white, is it? It's the blue first. You have to get your head round the order these come in. Blue, red. So so this one here is on one hand, it's blue is the low E, followed by the G, the low E, and the G, and the white is the A and the B. Whoops, G, come on. So it's a funny sort of arrangement. So the white is the A, and the B, and then the red is the D and the E. One of those, and two of those, and one of those. Okay. That's the D and the high E. Right, lovely. Okay. Right, so with these, I'm going to show you, Danny, what I do for best tuning stability. We talked about the locking tuners, which these are, but I talked about also, even with locking tuners, I fit them in a certain way so that you have some flexibility to slack them off again if you need to without them breaking. So some people, snotty people, when you point this out, they go, yeah, well, I can put mine on without breaking them, so you're just stupid. and that's fine if you can put them on, but nobody tells you how, and nobody has a little torque wrench, so the ordinary people like me will get it wrong, and so I would rather not break my strings. So first of all, we'll go through with the the low E, and we'll just line it up there. So we go all the way through, make sure it's up inside the block, hold it there, and then I pull it back a centimetre, and then I lock off, not too hard. See, how do you describe that? Just not too hard, right? That's very scientific. So again, loosen off the thing, go through, make sure the ball is up inside the block, pull back 1 centimetre, lock it off, not as hard as you want to, so I'm not crushing it too much. But even if it's not quite enough, then I will gain from that extra bit of grip with a centimetre of string going onto the post. So back a fraction, wind it on, pull it up, G, and so on and so forth. G in the block, back a centimetre, knock it off, pull it up, and so on. So we'll do the stretching followed by the intonation. So if you're ever going to do anything with intonation or setting the tremolo, make sure you always, and you've got new strings on, do your thorough stretching first. Especially if you ever come to have a Floyd Rose or something, never begin to even attempt to set up a Floyd Rose unless you're sure you've stretched all of the slack out of your strings. It's just a waste of time because it will continue going out of tune, and you'll continue to be unlocking and locking off the locking tuners and whatnot. Okay, so here's all my strings on. I'm going to snip off flush cut because I don't like getting poked in the finger and bleeding. So that's nicely snipped. Get rid of the rubbish. So 50% the nut, 50% tuning, 50% the slack in the strings. That's the important equation. So let's just get these up to roughly up to tune. So this 1/2 centimetre probably adds up to, right now it's about 1/2, 3/4 of a round, so it's about 1 complete turn, nearly, no actually, to be honest, it's about 3/4 of a turn on the big strings. I could be doing this with a power one, but let's keep it nice and human speed first. Nice and low on the first fret, that looks good. Just trying to get these strings just out of the way for a minute. I put the H.E.R tuners on using their frame, a little sort of chrome frame. That means you don't have to cut any more new holes in the headstock. So that's a tidier way of doing it. You'll see when I turn it over in a minute. It means that the H.E.R tuners now aren't screwed in, but this little chrome frame cradle that they sit in holds them all in a straight line, and they're just held then by being tightened up, which is, I think, a very good way of doing it. Okay, so what we're going to do is going to get it up to pitch in a minute, and then we'll do some stretching. So underneath the string tree, the tusk string tree, with posting and everything, it's about £7 string tree, and it's expensive compared to the butterfly metal ones, which everyone has lying around at home free, and there's too many of them. But I think if you're really hell-bent on tuning stability as we are, then it just makes total sense to, if you've got a tusk nut for that purpose, then let's not have the metal strings going under that scraping metal butterfly thing. Okay, so first thing to do now is to tune up. Okay, up to pitch. Now, as you'll know, I did the leveling with the 10 gauge strings on. Now we've gone to 9. So I'm going to check what 9s do to the relief. Well, it flattens it out a fraction, but that still leaves enough. So I'm happy with that. Feels right. So I'm going to do the stretching. So here's how I would stretch it. Let's zoom out a bit. Thumb and forefinger. So start there, lift it out of the notch if you can, the slot, and then really push between the thumb and the forefingers, the thumb and the fingers. So the main stretching part is here, not at the ends, because it's the ends that are liable to break it. And they still can break, but if you do stretching, if you concentrate the force of the stretching here, there is a tool, and I'm thinking about this, Danny, for your hands, because this might not be good. I'll just see if I can find this old tool that I don't use anymore, so you can have it. If I didn't, I think I might have thrown it away. Oh no, horrors. Oh, I think I did, you know. I'm sorry. Well, you can buy them. They're not that hard to find. I did throw it away because I never was going to use it myself. Blast. Right. It's called a string stretcher. It's a plastic thing, and you kind of hook it under the string and kind of pull it up and down. I found that broke strings too because I didn't have any touch feel, any feedback from my fingers. But with your carpal tunnel, this may be too much, so it might be worth looking at the string stretcher, spelt with an A. Can you believe it? String stretcher. Okay, let's just just put these on, and I'm being very careful with the 8 gauge high E. So a stretch, then a retune. Okay, so you heard how much difference, or how much that took to retune that, or how much out of tune it went with the stretching. So that's an indicator of the slack that is in there. Each time we stretch it, a little bit more comes out and it detunes. So we're kind of forcing it out now, and if you didn't, it would detune at its own pace. And that's the important bit to remember. It's not a mile of detuning, as you can hear. It's only a tone or two in total, but the fact is that the guitar, when it sheds it under its own steam, it does it a tiny bit, just enough to throw your guitar unpleasantly out of tune. And that, given that only one string has to go out of tune at a time to make your playing experience horrible, you can imagine that if you broke up every tone or two, two tones into tenths or 20ths of tones, in the amount needed to go out of tune for one string, then you've got hundreds of possible detunings in the life of your strings, unless you get it all stretched out first, like I'm doing here. Close. Okay, so I'm going to do it again. Now with these strings, they are very delicate compared to 9s or 10s, so I like to sometimes do a bit of a sort of pull longwise, but I'm going to sort of stop before I get to the E, because I don't want to risk breaking it. Tune it again, one more stretch. Right, one more stretch and then we'll be looking at the intonation side of things, and then the last bit will be setting the tremolo to down only. We will be heading home for Saturday night, feet up, something mind boggling on YouTube for a bit, something to eat, and then probably some guitar playing later on. Some people don't like these noiseless pickups. I do, because they're trouble free, and I mean true, I love the Fender Fat 50 single coils. They sound gorgeous. It's like, you know, every time I hear them it's like that's marked not for in the room. But these things, although they're not quite the same tone, the noiseless pickups allow you to play with high gain, which I'd like to do and lots of people like to do. So that's the great thing. You can play with high gain and you don't get any noisiness. Now I'm just going to, because I've moved a couple of things around on here, I'm just going to double check my playing action with my granddad glasses on. Oh, my eyes have gone funny again. Right, what have we got? I would say that is 1.5. That's good. That's a fraction under. Actually, it's not changed much at all. It's 1.5-ish. We want to come down a bit now on the G. Tiny bit. Down a bit on the B. Tiny bit on the E. Very good. Okie dokie, now we're on to the intonation side of things, for which we will need the tuner and a wire, and I probably might as well put my glasses on. Cable. So the intonation bit is, simplest way of saying it is that each string requires, for reasons to do with thickness and material, the makeup of the string, each string requires its own length, playing length, and while the guitar has a nominal playing length, in the case of a Strat it's 648 millimeters, and 648 describes the distance from the front of the nut here where the string leaves to the apex of the high E string typically, so we call it a 648, and that 648 is input into an equation for calculating the string, the fret positions, and with 648 all the fret positions come out at a certain closer togetherness at a certain rate. If you put in a different scale length for a Les Paul guitar, for example, at 628 instead of 648, you'll get frets that come slightly closer together in different relationships between them. So it's really critical that knowing the nominal or the notional scale length is critical to inputting into that calculation. Now these days, if you want to make a guitar, you just go to a fret position calculator and you put in that information, and that tells you the position of the frets, and you measure them up and draw the line and cut them there. But that's why that notional scale length, as we call it, is critical. But the truth is, on every guitar, you may just find that the high E is on the scale, is on the 648 scale length, is on that mark, but every single one of the rest of them won't be. And typically what they do is they step backwards from the, so the high E will be 648, the B will be 649 or 649 and a half, the G 650, 651, the D will come forward again of the G, and then the A will be back from the D about a millimetre and a half, and the E likewise. So it's two groups of 3 staggers, and it's very, very consistent for well-made strings from the proper manufacturer, all things being equal. So we measure it by tuning the harmonic ping to an exact E, and then we fret the high E, or the 12th fret. So we ping the 12th fret, tune it to the ping, and then fret it. This is now slightly flat. It reads slightly flat. Now if that happens, it means that the string length is slightly too long, and so what we need to do is you need to use our screwdriver to push the bridge slightly in the direction of the nut. So what I'm going to do there is a couple of, or a millimetre or so. Now this obviously detunes it too, so we'll tune it back up. Just try and get this. Still saying it's slightly fractionally too flat, so I'll go a couple turns more and I'll see if we get any response. But it's doing something, because you can hear it's going flat because the string is getting looser as it moves the bridge that way. There you go. So that's on. That's the position for the E. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually, by eye, set the others in relation to that, because they have the same stagger pattern in relation to each other, which is very dependable. So I can pretty much do the rest of them by eye, and miraculously they should work out right, but they'll be out of tune because I've moved them all. So if we tune them on the pings, B flat up to B, yay, G, perfect. So I've judged that all off the E. Yep. Yeah. Lovely. So that is pretty much spot on, just from the getting the high E right. But that's the interesting thing that goes to show you that the grouping is almost completely consistent. Given good quality strings, given everything else being equal, you'll end up with your saddles staggered like this. There's the nominal scale length on the high E. Let's zoom in a bit. There's your high E, 648, and actually if we got the ruler that would turn out to be 648. About a mil or a millimetre and a half back is the B, a millimetre and a half back is the G, slightly forward is the D, about a millimetre forward, not quite the whole millimetre and a half, but about a mil or 3/4 of a mil forward is the D, then a millimetre and a half back is the A, millimetre and a half is the E. So those two groups of 3 separated down the middle there like that. Stagger, stagger, and that is a totally dependable shape. If you do that and you suddenly find that one of the strings is completely out of position, throw that string away and buy another one, because you can almost, I can promise you, it'll be the string. And sometimes you can tell if you don't know, if you bought some strings really cheaply and you don't know if they're dummy or fake strings or they're the real ones, put them on, and if they're all over the place in the intonation, then you can just say they're fake. And that's because actually when you measure them for thickness and whatever, you find that they don't even come to the correct sizes that this set of strings should have, because they're not even that accurate in the fake string department. So that's an interesting thing. So if you get them out of, if they're anything but the 3/3, or occasionally that's only when it's a 3 plane and 3 wound. If you have a 4 wound and 2 plane, it's a 2 and 4 stagger, but it will be familiar, you know, and dependable. So there we have it. That is it done. Lovely low action. Oh, sorry, the last thing. Of course, I was going to show you the tuners. I'll show you them in a minute. But last thing I want to do now is I want to set the tremolo for the lowest or the lightest possible touch to operate. So here we go. I don't like the gap on these things. They, right. That actually clanks against there before it's fully in there, which is not good. Why does it do that? It's because the angle of the block is like this. The angle it goes into the block. Fender, I mean, really? Okay, so the thing to begin with is we say to ourselves, how, yes, we can bend it down, but it's really stiff. So what we do is we get our screwdriver, and this time, this is now where we unscrew it, and the claw screws, we're now bringing them out so that the pressure on the strings is relieved. And the question is, obviously, how much do we do this? Well, we do it not so far that the strings pull up the bridge of its own free will, but we do it at the point at which we can press the tremolo down without too much force. And the least, actually the answer is the least force possible. What we don't want is to bend a note on there and have the bridge lift up. So we want to ensure that there's enough spring pressure so that, for example, when we do bend a note, the back end doesn't go up, which it can do if it's not got enough string pressure. Still too tight, so we keep going. And we'll do a couple of bends and you'll hear what I mean. But it's nice when you get it to just the sort of just before the fulcrum or equilibrium point, and then it becomes nice and gentle. Now, what you'll notice is that's perfectly in tune and it's working the tremolo. So at the moment, this is what I'm going to do is bend this one, and that's trying to lift it, but not quite. So I'll go a couple more turns off, slacking off, and then see where we get to. And we'll try and do a bend. No, it's still not. Well, it is. You can hear it. But you've got to bend like crazy. There we have it. So that's the tremolo set where I most like it. Down only, with a very light touch. Now I'm going to have to try and stop this scraping as I remove it. Fender eye. What? Honestly, it's an odd angle. It's tilted. But anyway, so look, there we have it. Everything, my dear friends, are done. Everything done. Oh yes, let's have a look at the tuners on the back, how nice they look. There was one hole showing that I had to fill in. I took some still photos that you might see in the when I post later on. These holes were very ragged. Fender and the one on the front for the string tree. Basically, they'd used too small a pilot hole. The screws were too big, and they then split the wood and create this big flap of wood coming up. And one of them came out there, but I had to. Well, there was a hole showing, so I filled that hole. Another one came out from under there, which is you know, you don't see it, so thankfully it's not a problem. But it's slightly slack engineering. But anyway, look, there's the point is there's those hip shots. So they're not screwed in, they're just sitting on this guide trays, which are kind of held in place by the fact that they're all going through, the tuner's all going through the post, and they fit nicely widthwise. So it's a lovely tuner, beautiful looking. They're 85 odd quid. It's a lot of money, but I do like them, and I've had them before on things, and they are a nice, blingy, good quality tuner. And then finally, the first fret action is very nice, perfect. Thank you for watching. Oh no, ain't finished. Thank you soon for watching while I put back on the brushed alley back plate, and then we're going home to hopefully find out that there will be no effing nuclear sabotage in Ukraine. It's just, I can't believe that the world is sitting back and not doing anything. I know I'm your least warmongery person in the world, but we are in such a perilous state at the moment, and I think now is the time that we need to be saying to the Russians, you cannot do this. You did the dam, you've invaded a country, you've tried to kidnap children, you've done this, that and the other, but you cannot deliberately create a nuclear disaster. And if you do, we're going to punish you for it. We will retaliate, and people go, well, is it worth getting into World War III? If you continue to allow Russia to call your bluff and then do what it wants to do, knowing that you aren't going to respond, then you are giving Russia a permission to do whatever it needs to do. Short of, the one thing that Russia believes, or Putin believes now, is off the table. He already knows and believes that if he were to fire a nuke at the West, then Russia would be hit back. That's what he knows. But everything else, he knows he can get away with it, including the nuclear threats, including the genocide, including the dam, and so on and so forth. And I think we're in a perilous state. Anyway, on that bright and cheery note on a Saturday night, it's real life, I'm going to end this. And Danny, I hope you enjoyed seeing what I did. I didn't get to show you the adjustment of the truss rod. I talked it through, but because I didn't need to adjust it, and hopefully you won't. But having said that, I do recommend that you should learn how to do it. But on this type, maybe what would happen is, let's say you changed your heating system at home or something. If this flattened out too much, what you might experience is that if it goes at all flat or backbowed, you might suddenly start finding notes don't play down here in the first half of the neck. Obviously, if that happened, bring it to me and I'll show you, I'll video the taking off the neck, making the adjustment, putting the neck back on. But I didn't want to do it now because it was extra work, and I'd be faking it because it didn't need it. But it is a skill or a technique that everyone who owns a guitar should be comfortable doing. And I've had people in the past who sort of feel a bit, I wouldn't say miffed exactly, but they're a bit surprised that I would expect them to learn how to do that, since didn't they just pay me a lot of money to set it up? And of course you did, but the point is, it's something that you're expected to take care of or respond to all year round. If the weather changes, your neck will change. It's made of wood, so you're supposed to be ready at a moment's notice to make that small adjustment. So I think you have to learn how to do it. But for a newcomer or a non-technical person, for example, it is a pain on this because it's down here. On the normal guitar it'll be here, or most guitars it's here, and you wouldn't have trouble adjusting it. Anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Let's hope we don't have a European nuclear catastrophe. And I mean that most sincerely. I think it's just such a waste in every sense of the word. All right, see you soon for another one.